So anyway, yeah, I brought some geisha chocolate, which is absolutely lovely, and that's just to say that the next one I'm doing is the Madame Butterfly, which is at the opera. So and the cup is from Irma, and we found out
Oh, yeah,
1975.
when you leave.
So that was appropriate as the bowl for this. Anyway, so you might have heard my voice in different contexts because I was the first voice of the Metro when that started many years ago until 2019. And then I'm still the voice in the S train. So if somebody says, remember your bags, now you see the face. Exactly. So, I mean, always be considerate. And then at the Glyptotek, there's an app that they made about their architecture. You can hear my voice describing the architecture. Christiansborg Palace, if you go in Danish and English, there's an app called Museum, which is free. And in that app, you can actually get some stories about what you're looking at when you go through the representational halls in Danish and English, and SMK, and now just on Saturday they opened 5 guided tours around Holmegaard Værk, and to sort of give you the sense and the feeling of the myths in the bog, and all these different things, and the people and the society. And I'm there I'm Ellen Hillingsø's English voice. She's in Danish, I'm in English, and that happens quite a lot in different contexts. And then I do audio description at Danmarks Radio, the national television, and for the movies. And so anyway, you might have heard my voice. If you suddenly click on the television and there's something going on, might be my voice. It's called an audio describer when I do it for the blind and the visually impaired. Otherwise, I'm a voice artist. And right now, my background is as an actress and a storyteller. So time is running. And I do have quite a few different stories. And I thought, we always think of love as something that we think about because it's now. But the stories that are novels and theatre plays and all sorts of things come from are very much so the classical stories, the classic tales. And they weren't very they were quite controversial, and that was their entertainment. Hello. You had to have some gore, and you had to have some dilemmas and drama. And so I just want to bring a little story into play, which is called, which has to do with an apple. And we always think an apple a day will keep the doctor away. Well, I think maybe they needed quite a few doctors at Olympus, above Olympus, in the clouds where the castle was and where they were preparing for a wonderful wedding. There, Hera and Zeus had decided there was going to be a marriage between Thetis and Peleus. And Peleus was an old man from Earth, and Thetis was a water spirit. Now, why would those two get married, you might think? Well, Zeus had a good eye for beautiful women, and he had found this water nymph and watched her in the Greek waters, and Hera, his wife, had a jealous side to her. And she thought, even though I've brought up this wonderful water nymph and her sisters and everything, I better get her married and linked to somebody else. And so they decided there was going to be a wedding. And I'm sure all of you have prepared to go to a wonderful party. And everybody was planning beautiful hairstyles, a few stars here and there, and dresses like flowing clouds drifting around. Did I say everyone was invited? Well, not quite. There was one person who wasn't invited. Her name was Eris. And I don't know, I have experienced not being invited. I'm sure none of you have experienced something so treacherous to the soul, but Eris was very irritated about it. And she decided, well, I shall come anyway. And she went, and Zeus had placed Hercules at the gate and said, you're not going anywhere. And she looked up at this humongous Hercules, and she's talked to him here, and in her hand she had a golden apple. And as she had distracted him with her smile and her shiny eyes, she threw the apple into the grandiose hall. And in the air, it wasn't just a golden apple. It said, to the fairest on it. And the golden words on that golden apple seemed to sort of brighten the whole hall. And everybody looked and everybody stopped, to the fairest. But that must be me, that must be me. Oh, and everybody started running towards that apple to grab it. And you would think that Hera, who was god of motherhood, would have looked at them and said, oh, really? And you would think that Athena, who was the goddess of war, would say, oh yes, well, let them fight their own fight for an apple. And Aphrodite, the most beautiful of all the goddesses, goddess of love, of course she would just let that go, because she knew, all these women knew, that they were absolutely fabulous. But no, their arms went straight up into the air, and there was hair gripping and leg kicking, and bodies were rolling around. And Zeus thought, this is not the kind of wedding this is not the kind of party I want. So he snapped his fingers and everybody froze in all their different figurations, and on the floor, and a heel in the eye, and all of that. And he went and he took the apple and he said, got to find a way out of this. And so what he did was he snapped his fingers again, and everybody stood there and shouted and screamed, and he said, stop! And they did, because it was Zeus. I am going to give this apple to a very wise young warrior called Paris. And you three, and he looked at Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, and said, you are going with me. All right. And they went and left the party, because none of the other guys had any focus. They were all going, don't ask me, I'm reading a book. So he had to go elsewhere. At the foot of Mount Ida, there was a lake. And in that lake, this young prince from Troy, Paris, was taking a bath, swimming around, living the life. And suddenly in front of him were three amazing women. Hera, mother, of course, god of motherhood, was beautiful and round. Athena, strict and slim and very fit. And Aphrodite, well, every man's dream woman. Every time somebody looked at her, that was exactly what she was supposed to look like. And beside them was a very strict man with a frown across his brow. I would like you to take this apple, said Zeus, and gave it to Paris, who stood there and went, yeah, and give it to the one of these three women who you think is fairest. Can I divide it into three, thank you? Because they're all beautiful. He was a soldier, and he was a warrior and wise. No, you only have one apple. Okay. He could see he was in a pickle. But then, suddenly, he heard Hera inside his head go, would you like to have power? She was smiling and looked at the others, and through her mind wave, she said, I can make you powerful in politics. Well, Athena, she was saying, well, you're a soldier and you'd like to win fights and be the warrior that everybody knows, wouldn't you? I can give you that. And then suddenly he heard, you're from Troy, aren't you? They were all looking at each other very innocently. They weren't doing anything. I, said Aphrodite, know that there's a woman called Helena of Troy, and have you heard of her? And suddenly she had his full attention. I can give you the most beautiful woman on earth. And I can give you a wonderful place where you can be together, just the two of you. Aphrodite is the fairest of all, said Paris. And as the two others turned to Zeus in their fury, Aphrodite took this young man, Paris, and flew him all the way down to Helena, and they eloped together, and they found a wonderful paradise where they could actually live and be wonderfully happy. There was a little problem. Helena was married to Menelaus, and he was a king, and he was old, but he wasn't very happy about this situation, and neither was Hera and Athena, so they decided to create the War of Troy. But that is another story. They enjoyed life together as long as they could, and love with Aphrodite's help. Well, do I need to say any more? Well, there was another young couple, and this is Karen Blixen. We'll just come back to Denmark. And this young couple, he was called Sigismund, and she was called Louisa. And they had just gotten married. And they were so happy. Just a week ago, they had gotten rings on their fingers, and they were in heaven. And now you might think so. She was 19 and he was 24. What tale is there to tell? But those two had been in love since the age of, 10 years. They'd looked at each other. For 10 years, they had written to each other little notes, and they'd found secret places to go. And the older they got, the more devious they had to be, because her family was wealthier than his, and his family, it wasn't meant to be. But the two had convinced their families that this was meant to be. This was true love. Well, they'd lived at his wonderful house, manor house in the country, and he was a sheep. He had lots of sheep, and he knew everything about sheep. And he was a bit worried. He wanted to protect her from everything. And he said, "Listen, I'm sorry. Are you enjoying yourself? Do you like being here?" Because she'd come from the town and the city with all the hub and bub and all the fun. And she said, "Of course, it's lovely. This is my house." And as she walked around and folded the linen and put them into the linen cupboard, she thought, well, I've such a short while since I was just playing with my doll's house, and here I am. This is all mine. She went into the garden where all the beautiful flowers was, cut them up, and then made these beautiful vases and bouquets, and she was full of joy. This morning, he'd asked her to come down to the sheepfold, because that's where the sheep were. And they had had two little lambs. And he told her all the way down to the sheepfold about how he had found this ram and this other little sheep, and this was going to be the best breed of the country. And she looked at him and said, "Oh, he's very sweet, isn't he?" "Oh, but he's so childish. Just talking about sheep." Well, I nod. Well, he's also quite clever, of course. She was walking in the most beautiful white dress and had a big white hat on, and she'd smile at him, and suddenly they were there. And the shepherd, he came towards them, and he had this very worried look on his face, and he said, "Well, I'm sorry, there's bad news. The two little lamb that I told you about, the one died during the night, and the other one can hardly stand on its feet." And then the two men started talking sheep talk. And they did that for quite a while. And she put her hand on his shoulder to sort of show that, "I understand you're upset." But she didn't really listen. She looked around and thought, "Aren't they going to bring the little lambs to me?" But they didn't. Suddenly she listened, and that was because they started talking about a sheep thief that had ravaged the whole country around them. And it had come so close that the other night he had killed the farmer in the next door farm. And the young son had actually fled. And this thief had been beaten, but he'd escaped once again with a lamb over his shoulders. Oh, the chill of that story made her spine go, oh. Goosebumps all over. It was almost like Little Red Riding Hood. And the wolf, my goodness, is he really here? And then the shepherd said, if I found him, I would just wring his neck. That would be the true thing to do. And she said, "Yes, you're right, shepherd. He should actually die for what he did." But her husband, Sigismund, he was so full of love, he couldn't think of anything so malicious. He said, oh, I actually feel very sad and sorry for this thief. And she looked at him and she said, really? But he said, listen, this is all going to take longer. Why don't you just go home? I have to deal with this. I've been dismissed for sheep. She was not pleased. Well, she took off her hat and threw it on the floor and said, well, you can bring back my hat and yes, we'll talk. And then off she went. As she went down this little path and she realized, my goodness, this is my forest and this is my lake and those are my birds, all the birds that are here. And suddenly she realized she hadn't been on her own for so long. I don't think she'd ever been alone. Though just a few days ago she'd walked down here and she'd had her little dog and her dog had run into the forest. And there had been a sort of little cove of the trees. The trees had sort of opened and made it almost like a little church room. Oh, wonder where that is, she said, and looked around. Might be over there. And then she thought, if I stray from the path and go and find this little wonderful space in the middle of the woods, and he comes walking and I'm not there, he will long for me. He will know how much he will miss me if I'm not there. And so she did her little game of hide and seek and walked off the path and went into the forest. And her dress got caught and her hair got caught and she kept walking. And suddenly, that's where it is. She walked towards it and her dress, the hem of her dress got caught and she bent down, freed it, and then opened the branches, and right in front of her stood a man with brown eyes. And without moving her eyes, she looked him in the eye, and you know how you can just scan a person without moving your eyes. She saw that his face was all beaten and blue and blood on his cheek, and his feet were bare. Only some sort of pieces of material were tied around his feet. And his one arm was hanging limply on the side, and she realized that her sacred space had been filled with lamb skins, and there'd been a fire. And suddenly she realized that he was lifting a knife and pointing it at her throat. As she stood there, she realized she'd never in her life been afraid, and she wasn't afraid at that moment at all. She just looked at him, and then suddenly she realized, oh, well, he probably would like something of worth, and the only thing I have to give is my wedding band on my hand, given to me by the priest last week. On the way, she had sort of used a handkerchief to dry the sweat off her brow and kissed it for the joy of everything. And that handkerchief was in her hand. And well, she took off her ring without letting go of that gaze, holding him fast, took off her ring. And as she did that, she dropped the ring and her handkerchief. His knife moved towards the ground, still keeping her eyes fixed. And he took the handkerchief, not the ring, but he kicked the ring to the side. The handkerchief was wound around his blade of his knife and put into the sheath. And then he lowered his gaze, and she knew that was a sign for her to go, and she did. She raced as quickly as she could back to the path, and suddenly she heard her husband's voice calling her. Oh my goodness, there you are. Well, things went well. It started walking, the little lamb, blah, 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 blah. Kept talking and didn't realize that she wasn't answering, and suddenly he snuck in front of her. The path was so slim, or what's it called, small, that he had to walk in front of her. And he looked at her and he said, are you all right? I lost the ring. What ring, darling? And she just looked at him. Oh, well, never mind. We'll go and get another one. The ring. Doesn't matter if it's this ring or the other. Don't worry, darling. We'll just get another. Oh, he saw that she was upset and he said, well, where did you lose the ring? Do you remember where you lost the ring? And she looked at him and she said, no. That's where she ends it. Well, I'll tell you a little story, because what is it? What is truth and what is lie? And going back to across to the ancient time, there was a little discussion about truth and lie, and there was this story about how lie and truth met in town, and lie was always very popular, and people liked them because, or liked her, him, her. Lie was sort of both genders, I think, and truth the same. And what happened was that truth would have her following and lie would have her following. And at one point, lie decided to make a challenge and said, well, truth, why don't we two go and take a swim in the lake? And truth said, yeah, really? What are you up to? No. You always say I lie, but look up, the sun is shining, isn't it? Oh, yes, it is. That's the truth. So, and aren't you sweating a bit from the neck down the back? I saw something pearly on your cheek. Yeah, lie, you're right. Yes, it is very warm. Well, why don't we, just the two of us, go down and take a swim? Well, truth looked at lie and thought, well, maybe I can teach her something. And lie smiled, and off they went. And down at the lake, lie and truth took off their clothes. And then lie said, well, why don't we challenge each other? The first one who comes swims to the other side of the lake and back again. Well, that person can be the person in the center of attention, and the other one will be quiet for a whole day. What do you think? Oh, that would be nice, Truth thought. Well, wouldn't it be nice for Truth to conquer a whole day without lie interfering? Because she knew she was strong. So at the count of three, said lie, 1, 2, 3, and off went Truth into the water, swimming and swimming, looking over her shoulder and thinking, I am so quick. Well, the thing is, lie never jumped into the lake at all. She took on Truth's clothes and went back into town. And everybody said, oh, I'm a bit confused. I mean, you have a bit mixed signals. Oh, well, and lie told stories and said they were true because I'm wearing Truth's clothes. The following of Truth were a bit sort of discerned about this. And the followers of lie thought, well, good story. There's something I can talk to other people about. And anyway, when Truth came back and saw that her clothes had been taken, she said, I'm not going to put on Lie's clothes. Never in my life will I do that. So she walked through town as God had given her shape, as naked as the naked truth. And whenever she met somebody, she said, oh, well, I'm so sorry. And she told the story and said, oh, that's a lie. Lie would never do that. Well, it is the truth. I'm telling you the truth. But nobody would look at her because she was just too overwhelming. And the naked truth can be very discerning. So depends on how you look at things, which is most important. Okay. Yeah, what is truth and what is lie? I will tell you a story. Roald Dahl, do you know him? Have you heard of him? Chocolate Factory. Well, I'll bring you back to the 50s. Back in the 50s, the houses were very neat, and there were quite a few houses with neat little front yards, and in one of those petite little perfect houses was a lounge chair, like these. And they were placed about like that, just beside each other. And in one of them, Mary Maloney was sitting, and Mary Maloney was embroidering. And beside her, there was a lamp, almost like here, just a little lamp, and she could see what she was sewing. And behind her was a table, and on that table were glasses ready for scotch. The bottle of scotch was there, and there was a bit of water and ice cubes. And as she sat there with her tummy, 6 months pregnant, she sat there waiting for her husband to come home. And she looked up at the clock and it said, 5 minutes to 5. Oh, and within that short period of time, she really shared all the thoughts with herself of how she loved her husband. She loved the fact that when he came in, he was he would quickly sort of fill the whole room with his aura because he was such a man. He was a police officer and detective. And so she loved the way that when he came home, she would give him a drink and he'd sit down and he wouldn't talk until he'd had his drink because it's such a hard work being a detective and police officer, and they keep them working very hard. Ding, 5 o'clock, she heard the car drive in on the gravel and the door open, and she stood there, embroidery she'd put aside, and came with his scotch. After she took his jacket, he took his glass of scotch and sat down, and she hung up his coat. And been a hard day? Yes. Well, he sat down and started drinking his scotch. And he didn't say much. Well, been a hard day? She took up her embroidery and said, well, want some cheese and crackers? No. I can make dinner. I haven't prepared food because it's Thursday. And Thursday they usually went out to dinner. No, thank you. I'm fine. Oh. He got up and helped himself to another glass of whiskey, and this time was much darker. Not so much water or just tonic in that one. And he started drinking, and he kept drinking. And she thought, now that was a bit strange. I'm going to make dinner, she said, and got up. And he said, no, sit down, I have something to tell you. He never used that tone with her before, and suddenly he thought, what is going on? There's something I must tell you, and I'm hoping that you won't make a scene, because that wouldn't be good for my professional work. But and then he talked for quite a while. And what he said, every single word he used distanced him from her, and she was devastated. Of course, I'll take care of you and make sure you have money. And she felt numb. She didn't know what to think. Well, maybe this wasn't happening. If she pretended it hadn't happened, maybe it hadn't happened. When he was done, she couldn't feel her feet, but she got up and she said, I'm going to make dinner. And she stepped into the kitchen and turned on the oven. And then she went down the stairs to the basement, and there was the freezer. And she opened the freezer and stuck her hand in there and thought, I don't know what I'm going to get. And suddenly there was something wrapped in newspaper, and she looked, oh, lamb, it's going to be lamb tonight, that's fine. And she closed the freezer and walked up the stairs again and came into the room and said, well, she didn't say anything because he said, oh, don't make dinner, I'm going out. Something happened while he drank his last whiskey. She put both hands onto that piece of lamb, leg of lamb, and swung the leg of lamb and whack at the back of his head. And she stood there for a second and thought, he stood for 20 seconds, and then suddenly, like a bag of potatoes, he fell to the ground. Oh dear, I think I killed him, she thought. She knew exactly what would happen to somebody because he was a detective, and she'd heard all the sergeant's stories and everything. And she went, oh dear, well, I can deal with that, I think. And then suddenly she saw his tummy and she said, oh, I cannot deal with that at all. Because she didn't know what they would do to somebody who was pregnant. Oh, and well, if I pretend nothing has happened, then nothing has happened, she said. And off she went into the kitchen and opened the oven and put the lamb in there, put some salt and pepper like she usually did, and closed the oven again. And right above there was a mirror, and she looked in the mirror and she said, tried to smile. It was a bit difficult, kind of grimacy. Sam, I think I need some potatoes. She breathed deep as you can when you're 6 months pregnant. Sam, I need some potatoes and peas. Oh, that didn't sound very bad. No. So she went and took on her coat and gloves and her hat, and off she went through the kitchen door into the garden and down the street to the grocery store. It wasn't 6 yet, so he was still open, and she came in and he said, oh, hello, Mrs. Maloney. How can I help you? Oh, usually we go to dinner on Thursdays, but But Jack, he was too tired, so I decided to make dinner. But I didn't have any vegetables, so I'd like to buy some potatoes and some peas. And he turned around and gave her what she needed, put it into her basket, and he said, what about afterwards? He loves cheesecake. I have a piece of cheesecake. Oh, well, that would be fine, thank you. She paid and walked down the street, and as she walked, she heard that the birds were fighting about where they were going to sleep that night, and she kept on walking, and it was really nice. It was a nice evening. And she got in the door, and she kept thinking, well, this is the way it's going to be, as natural as I can be. And then she came into the house and put the basket on the table and said, hello, Jack. And then she went into the living room, and there he was, lying on the floor, and his blood was tainting her silk carpet. Oh, well, she didn't think of that. She burst into tears because she actually really loved him. And then, with the tears coming out of her face, she grabbed the telephone and she called the police station, because that number was just at the back of her head, you know. Oh, you've got to come, he's dead, he's dead. And excuse me, who's dead? Maloney. This is Mrs. Mary Maloney. Oh, Jack Maloney, really? Do. Within minutes, the police cars came, and her good friend, Mr. Noonan, he came, and she fell into his arms, and he patted her shoulders, looking at all the others, going, uh-oh. They looked at poor Jack, who was lying very still on the silk rug in the living room. More and more police officers came. There was a doctor and there was a photographer, and they all came in and they all discussed what was going on. And she was asked, so what happened? And she said, oh, well, I went to the grocery store to buy potatoes and peas. When I got home, this is what I came home to. Tears, panic, all sorts of things. And they went, oh, well, why don't you just sit here? Why don't you go to your sister? No, I just want to sit here. Why don't you come to my wife's house? She's right across the street. No, I just want to sit here and collect myself. And, well, her husband was put on a stretcher and was taken away. And time passed. There was a scent from the oven of this lovely lamb in the oven. Well, at one point she sort of said, excuse me, would you make a little drink for me? And one of the policemen said, yes, of course I will. And I'll make it a thin one for you because of... Won't you join me? Well, I'm on duty for Jack. She said, oh, yes, absolutely. Yes, of course, for Jack. And then the others came, and they said, well, this is for Jack, our colleague. And as they drank this, their little scotch, then she said, well, you know, he would have felt really bad if I didn't had you come into the house and didn't serve dinner for you, because the dinner's ready and I've got it all ready and nobody's going to eat it. And they said, well, we couldn't. Oh, but for Jack. Well, for Jack, absolutely. And then they went into the kitchen and they sat around the table and they took the lamb and they ate big chunks of it, and she could hear that they were talking as they were eating the lovely lamb and saying, oh my goodness, the doctor said it was a really hard piece of weaponry that was smashed into Jack's back head. It must have been a iron pole or something. Oh, they can't have run away with that very far. No, they couldn't. Oh, well, you find the weapon, you find the man. Yes. We'll have to have a look around later. Don't you think? Yes, absolutely. Well, you know, I think the weapon is right under our noses. At that sentence, luckily for her, in the living room, she was sitting there and she couldn't help but giggle. There is, if we go across the Atlantic again, there was a circus. And there was a circus manager, and he was called Horacio Fortunato. He was the third generation of circus people, and there wasn't just one circus. There were 3 circuses. I mean, not at the beginning. In the beginning, his great-grandfather only had one tent, and this circus manager would do everything. I mean, he would walk the line, and he would be the trapeze guy, he would be the circus clown, and all he had as company was a gorilla with a pink tutu. But that was a long time ago. He was called Nona, and, well, he had this magical way of being with other people, so that he always had a girl or lady or woman visit him in the caravan afterwards, because Nona could make people laugh. But Horatio Fortunato, he was the third generation, and with these 3 caravans, he was quite rich. Yeah, he had everything he wanted. If he wanted to entertain himself, well, he would look around, and his first choice was tall, blonde girls with long legs and well-equipped. Okay, that was his choice. And several at a time, no problem. Security guards, that was also a thing. He would wear something very bold and have his clothes sewn to fit his very fit body. His shirts would always be opened a bit too far down, so that his lion mane would have cream, so that it would keep it down. But poof, in front here, there would also be a lion mane. But what can you expect from somebody who had been raised in a circus? I mean, when every other child is just rolling about, he was doing somersaults with the trapeze artists. And a little kitten or a little puppy? No. Tigers, lions. That's where he would be crawling in and lying on their lion's belly. And when he got older, he became the lion tamer, of course. Well, he knew the biz of circus, but had the fortune teller said to him, "Dear friend, you are going to fall in love," he would have said, "Not going to happen. You're going to fall in love with a little tiny woman with black curls and brown eyes, about half your size." Never going to happen. I've just asked these 3 girls to go to Bahama and do Bahama with me. But that is what happened. One day he sat in a restaurant, and he had 3 girls that he'd promised to go to the Bahamas with. And the guards were sitting there, and suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he saw this tiny woman. And she walked graciously through the restaurant. And by her arm, suddenly he realized there was a man. And she had diamonds around her neck and in her ears, and a little sort of tiara buckled into her curly hair. But she had this grace about her when she walked around, and people would nod at her and she would have a little conversation. He turned his chair very sort of briskly and then sat there. Couldn't close his mouth. He was just completely in awe of her. Well, she noticed this person, and in more ways than just by looking at him. The cologne traveled far into the restaurant, and so she came closer, and she thought, do I have to be worried about my jewels? Is he, am I going to be robbed when I leave the restaurant or something? And she walked by and nodded to him, and then he kept staring at her. The next morning, there was a glass case with a long red rose right outside the door. And she looked at it and she said, there was a card, Fortunato, with golden writing. She took it and she opened the door and looked out, and there was a bin right next to it. And she opened the bin and said, I will have nothing of this. Poof, crash, the crystal vase. The box broke. The next day there were tulips from Holland. She looked at them and she said, I will have nothing of this. And she threw it out, hoping that he was there and understood what she was saying. This continued for days. She wished if she went to the opera, he would be in the booth on the other side, waving at her. If she went to the bookshop, he would be standing on the other side, looking at her, going, do you like this book? I'll buy it for her. So she decided to stay at home. This was not for her. Every time she lifted the telephone, there would be somebody saying, oh, you are beautiful. I love you. Well, she stayed at home. he wasn't used to not being accepted as the great lover. So he was a bit frustrated about this, and he decided to go to her husband's jewelry store. And so he went there, and he walked around, sizing up the gentleman, and he looked at all the jewelry, and he said, I need some jewelry for a very special woman. Ah, very special woman, yes. And of course the jeweler brought the diamonds. He looked at him and thought, well, he's an upcoming, so he'll probably use some extra money. No, diamonds. This woman, her husband throws diamonds at her like they were candy. Oh, really? That's the situation. So what are you looking for? Well, her eyes. She has the beautiful eyes of green emeralds. Emeralds? Well, I do have a necklace with green emeralds here, right. That's the color, he said, Horatio. And he said, pack it in a beautiful box. And he did, her husband. And the next morning, Patricia came down, and on the mantelpiece there was a box from her husband's jewelry store. So she went there, and there was a great big mirror there. She opened it. Oh my goodness, she looked at herself. The color of her eyes. Oh, she didn't realize that he'd actually noticed her eyes. They hadn't looked into each other's eyes for God knows how long. Anyway, so she takes it on and says, wow, this is beautiful. And then from underneath the box, there's a card with Horatio Fortunato, and down went how dare he go to her own husband's shop and buy her jewelry from his shop? How dare he? The insolence. Well, she asked her driver, the chauffeur, to go directly to the place that she's also delivered other things. And the next morning there was nothing. Oh, she was so happy. Nothing outside. Oh. And the next day again, nothing. Well, in the meantime, Horatio had called Nona. He lived in Switzerland, and with his 10th wife, probably. And Nona could hear that Horatio was out of his wits. I'm losing in my bets. I'm losing in the games I play. I'm losing money here, there, and everywhere. I can't keep my mind focused. All I think about is her, and she doesn't want to talk to me. Talk? Who wants to talk? She probably doesn't want to talk. No, but she doesn't even want to see me. Well, what have you done? And then he told all the things he'd done. But that's all about money, dear. That's something that isn't of interest to her. She can have everything she wants. If she wants to buy it, she'll buy it. Give her something that she has never experienced. Or surprise her. And then suddenly Nona put down the telephone and started thinking of all the women he had surprised in his life. And he had planted a seed in Horatio. Horatio decided to talk to one of the little girls at the circus. It was in the beginning of the week, so they weren't doing a big show until the end of the week. So he asked her, I would like you to deliver this necklace to the jeweler. And when you go, he made a story. And she said yes, when she saw how much money he was giving her. So she comes into the jeweler's store and says, oh, I'm so sad. My boyfriend is such a fool. I was wondering if you would take this and buy this off me. And when he saw the necklace, he said, oh, I understand. That's such a buffoon, that man. Oh, you poor thing. And she started crying, and he put his arm around her. And they went out for coffee that day. And the next evening they went out for dinner. And on the Thursday, he called Patricia and said, oh, Patricia, I need to go to New York. There's an auction with diamonds. And she said, oh, yes, please go. Oh, I just need to be on my own. I've been to the hairdresser. I have hair. They were too hard on me with all the curls. I have such a headache. Oh, well. And off he went with this pretty young girl. Patricia sat outside on her sun bench. And she had her magazines, and the sun was warm, and she fell asleep. And suddenly she woke up. Ay. What was that terrible sound? Suddenly there was somebody swinging from one tree to the other in her garden. She closed her eyes. This must be a hallucination. It must be from all this. Hi-ya! Oh no, it's coming back. And over to the other tree flew this other acrobat, maybe, with a blue cape and golden suit. Suddenly there was a woman flying, woo, grabbing one person's hands and swinging across, throwing little butterflies and disappearing into the branches again. This was very strange. Suddenly, from behind a tree, a wagon came, and on that wagon was a sarcophague. And on that opened, and on each side there were these Egyptian women dragging this wagon with the sarcophage. Sarcophagus, it's called, sorry, sarcophagus. Anyway, and when it was placed all the way in the middle of the just where the swimming pool was, suddenly the coffin opened and there was a mummy in there. Tarzan came out of the tree, and he had barely a leaf. It was a very small leaf. Was it a leaf? No, it wasn't. Anyway, he came running across in his natural body figure and came all the way over. And when he looked at the beautiful Egyptian women, they got a bit sort of flushed and tried to waft him off, and the mummy was very upset. So as soon as Tarzan got closer, boff, the mummy gave the Tarzan such a bashing that he landed face down in the grass. Well, Tarzan was up again, and those two mummy came out of the sarcophagus, whatever. And they started fighting like crazy. And out of the corner of her eye, Patricia suddenly saw a hunchback coming with a chain, and on that chain was a black panther. And the two were fighting, and this panther was getting closer, and she thought, should I jump into the pool to get away from the cat? What should I do? And then suddenly Tarzan bashed the guy who had the hunchback, so he fell down and let go of the chain with the panther and got closer and closer. And Tarzan came over and, well, he sort of put his hand behind the ear of the panther, which turned around, paws in the air, and said, oh, let me be cuddled by you. And then a tall man with a tall hat came towards her. He bowed, and out of his tall hat he took a cake and placed it on a plate in front of her. She was so confused. What was going on? Da, 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 da. Suddenly there were fanfares, and from the back of the garden came a platform. On that platform was a sort of, what's it called? Well, there was a plateau, and in that there was a, what's it called? Curtain. Boxers in very small shorts with boxing gloves pushed this plateau towards her. Da, 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 da. And as the music stopped, the curtain was drawn, and out came Horatio Fortunato. No cream in his hair. It was just like a lion's mane. The shirt was buttoned all the way down below his pants. And as he stood there, he said, hello. And something magical happened. Patricia had not laughed in years. And suddenly she felt a giggle that grew inside of her. It all sort of overwhelmed her, and she put her hand out, and he put his hand in hers. It's one that I wrote. This last story was Isabel Allende from Eva Luna's The Stories of Eva Luna, which are a compilation of many different stories. So this one is one I wrote back in 2008, and very few people have heard it. There once was a king with a golden crown, but the weight of that heavy crown made the king's brow frown. He walked in his castle in his brown gown of heavy golden eider down. The king had a queen. She too had a crown, though the weight of that crown didn't make her brow frown. She was from out of town. One day as the sun shone down, she took off her warm brown gown of heavy golden eider down, and to the pond in the park she went down. Deeper grew the king's frown under his heavy golden crown, when from the castle's hall he found on the ground the queen's brown gown of heavy golden eider down, thrown down, and topping that, her golden crown. I've gone to bathe. I am for the pond bound. He saw her into the pond step down. Oh no, my queen, we'll surely drown. Come out, get back on the ground. From the castle wall he shouted down, while throwing first his heavy gown and then his golden crown down. Come, come, my king, I will not drown. The king's brow now got yet a frown. I won't get in that pound so round. To this sweet earth my feet are bound, he said. The queen, she laughed and pointed down. You've taken off your golden crown and heavy gown of eider down. Now do take off your frown. The king, feeling like a clown, realized while looking down he now was wearing but a frown. So into the cool pond he did step down, letting the queen, her sweet magic, take his frown. Hooray for those from out of town. So from Isabel Allende and Karen Blixen and the Greeks, and a little bit of me. I hope you have enjoyed yourself.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you.